Now, you may not know this African Banking Corporation was established in Zimbabwe and moved on to Botswana during the difficult economic times that Zimbabwe has been undergoing. Now, there is a renaissance going on in Zimbabwe, and to give us more of that story is Doug. Doug, welcome, and thanks very much for joining us indeed.
Thank you, Godfrey. Thanks
but
for having me.
Yeah, let's just begin by perhaps looking at the Zimbabwe story. I particularly wanted to focus on the Zimbabwe story because you are on the ground, and you probably are seeing more of the work that's being done to revive that economy than probably most other people who watch from outside. From what you have seen, is there anything that has fundamentally changed that has made business more welcome to Zimbabwe and is indicating perhaps the possibility of a new beginning for that economy?
Godfrey, yes, there is some change. I think from a business point of view, the most important glaring difference between now and, say, last year is the fact that the dollarization of the economy has created an environment of certainty. With hyperinflation, I think just about everybody, particularly business, was really challenged as to how one could manage in such a turbulent and extremely unpredictable environment. Now, dollarization has brought predictability, it has brought certainty, it has brought stability in all aspects, particularly on the pricing side, pricing on the currency, interest rates, and everything else. So that is really fundamentally a very big change.
Perhaps another day we can have a discussion about how you guys survived, because I remember we looked at the numbers that were produced by the Carter Institute, and they were talking about 79.6 billion % inflation in November, second highest inflation in history. I don't know how you did it, but maybe we'll get you in another day and we can talk about that. But let's talk about what you're seeing now. I was there last week, and one of the things that struck me was I saw trucks carrying goods that I had not seen for many, many years, and these were like in more significant numbers, suggesting perhaps companies are beginning to produce again. Are you getting that business coming through your bank and your customers coming through and asking for loans and that kind of thing and functioning like a normal economy?
Well, incidentally, the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries at their annual conference in Harare last week, and right. I had the privilege of addressing them on the role of the financial sector in intermediation in a recovering economy. I think one of the key issues is that capacity utilizations are still very, very low. That is a fact.
As to be expected.
Yes. And therefore, what you would like to see, improved supply of goods locally manufactured into the shops and so on and so forth, that is still at a very low level. But I think for the whole economy, it's good that the goods are in the shops. So that's the first step.
Sure.
Now one has to work on capacity utilization. One has to work on how companies can now reassert themselves and in a very competitive environment. Now, what is a major hindrance is liquidity. Obviously, the central bank, the authorities, and everybody else says, well, the banks must lend. But the reality is that most of the money that is in the banking system right now, at the end of June, it is about 700 million, just a little over 700 million of the whole banking sector.
$700 million.
Dollars, yes. We're talking dollars on and so there is an expectation that it's probably going to end up the year at about $1 billion. Now, that is still far short of the requirements of industry. But what is more important is that most of that money is really call money, which you cannot lend long term.
Right.
And therefore, the authorities are frustrated, but so is everybody. But the problem is that there is all this whole, finger pointing that the banking sector is not lending. Whereas, in fact, the truth is that most of this money is really short-term money. It literally is in your account for a couple of days or hours before, obviously, the depositors have to use it.
Right.
I think once the liquidity has improved, we should see a significant improvement.
It's an interesting time because I do a few interviews from here and I talk to company CEOs from time to time. And I have, I think probably in the last 2 weeks or so, spoken to about 3 CEOs who are potentially talking about transactions in Zimbabwe. But there does seem to be something that is holding back. And you were telling me on earlier that one of the stumbling blocks between South African businesses, preventing South African business from investing in Zimbabwe, is the issue of land tenure and land security. Is that issue resolved? And how big a stumbling block is it?
Well, Godfrey, land is why we are where we are in Zim, and so it's common cause.
Yeah.
The country is yet to debate. The country is yet to deal with how it will both deal with some of the historical, negative externalities that came as a result of the land reform process, and also how to deal with the whole question of land tenure, land husbandry, and a number of issues to do with the land. I don't think it's going to be an overnight issue. It's probably going to have to be either incremental, right. In other words, making progressive progress in dealing with specific glaring issues, or the country has to come together and debate this issue exhausted and then decide on how the land will be dealt with. Right. Just coming to the South African issue, my understanding is that one of the major impediments for South African business to come in a significant way is because the bilateral investment protection agreement has not been signed. Right. And I understand that the nagging issue there is the issue of land. Oh God. Well, some provision in the current draft.
Doug, this discussion could go on forever, and I'm sure we'll be able to bring you back at some time again to talk about some of the lessons that you have drawn from the banking crisis that we've seen in other parts of the world and what is left in Africa. But it must have left opportunities for you as well.
Of course, there are great opportunities in Africa, and I think we have suffered more, just like the rest of the world, but with very mild effects so far. If this is the worst we have seen, then we would have said that Africa has survived this particular crisis reasonably well.